Ezekiel Thornwood lunged forward, a blaze of muskets blooming in the heat of a new Carolina dawn. The air burned with powder and salt, the sea salt tang clinging to the lips of the watchers, and the muffled drumbeat of distant drums. Smoke curled across the field like a pale serpent, and the line of Confederates stood as still as gravestones, eyes narrow, faces pale, waiting for the telltale drop of averted heads. Ezekiel stood tall as a tree that weathered many storms, shoulders square, breath held, hands clenched. A drumbeat of orders cracked through the air, crisp as an iron nail. Then the sky exploded in fire and iron. Muzzle flashes painted the morning with white flashes and black smoke. Rising action, the world narrowed to a single breath, and then to a single sound, the whistle of bullets tearing through air, the iron sting of lead kissing his skin, the muffled thump of bodies collapsing, men swearing in their own tongues, the earth exhaling a damp sigh of clay. He did not fall, not yet. Not while the line of men above him still held their grounds, not while his heart kept its stubborn time against his ribs. Confederate captain's voice sharpened. "Aim true, men. He's not a dog to be mercy-killed. He's a traitor and a slave to be punished." The rain of bullets began again, but something was off. The first two strikes clawed shallow into his chest and shoulder, but only rippled through the body. No bone-cracking impact, no bolt of pain that would steal his breath away. He tasted copper and heat in the back of his mouth, tasted fear unspent, tasted the grit of the field. 12 bullets they would later count, 12 bursts of dark metal and wild hope, and not one found a vital organ. Not one. "They're firing too high," a Confederate sergeant coughed, his voice wavering with a tremor of fear or fatigue, or perhaps both. "Guard him, men. He's making us look like fools in front of the enemy." Ezekiel's lips pressed to a dry line. He had been a soldier of the Union heart, from the day the colors were dragged through his town by the marching drums of opportunity and fear. The white is a banner, no a burden, carried by many, and yet the black man carried an extra weight, a burden of proving humanity where it was denied. He did not scream when the first round stitched a line across his torso, not a cry that would betray the plan he'd chosen with his life. The second volley sliced across his ribs, and he felt the world tilt, felt the ground tilt with him, yet he did not buckle. He did not surrender the hope that still lived in the marrow of his bones, a stubborn flame that refused to die. The firing squad paused, as if surprised by the stubbornness of the thing they were killing. A captain shouted something that sounded like, "End him already!" And the line shifted, rifles rising again with the careful, practiced motion of men in a chain. The third through the 12th bullet slammed into air, smoke, and the vague shape of a body. If pain flashed, it was a rumor, a cruel rumor carried by the wind. He felt nothing and everything all at once, like a bell struck by a momentary ghost. The world grew heavy. The weight of the earth pressed into his chest, and the cold of the ground pressed against his cheeks. He could hear the muffled thud-thud of the men's boots, scuffed by the mud and the marching of war, canteen sloshing, breath wheezing. The line of men above him dimmed into a wreath of smoke, and the heat of the sun on his arms burned like a brand. He did not fall. He sank to his knees as if the earth itself pulled him. He pressed his forehead into the dirt, and the ground drank his breath. "Don't lie there, son," a Confederate officer growled, though the sentence could have been said to a dog for all its mercy. "Bleed, break, die, and be done with it." The order was given to finish him, to end this charade of defiance, but the bullets, 12 of them, had not ended him, not yet. They had chosen a different script. The 8th hour stretched, and the field wore a different face. The sun shifted from pale orange to a brutal cold white. The bodies around him exhaled their last breaths, the ground offering a weary grave to those who had fallen. He remained still, a corpse with a heartbeat, a smoke-dusted spectre in a world where every sound sounded like a promise of danger and a threat of discovery. The air smelled of damp earth, rusted metal, and something sweet and rancid, old leaves rotting in a creek bed, a feed bag of corn, the kind of smell that haunted soldiers in their rest. He could hear the coughs of his captors, dry all wind and sorrow, and the distant clack of yellowing canteens, water, water, water. He listened. The 8-hour window did not feel like time slowed. It felt like a door that wouldn't close, a hinge that wouldn't stop creaking. The world moved around him in morsels, a bug skittering across a blade of grass, a bird call far off that sounded like a memory of home, the whisper of a flag brushing against a wooden stake, the sound of a boot stepping in the mud, slow, careful, almost reverent, as if the land itself honored what was happening. He lay as still as a log, listening to life go on around death. A guard's voice finally broke the trance, soft, almost tender, in the way a man would speak to a frightened animal. "Turn him for a minute," the officer said. "If the march changes, no one will blink." The guard hesitated, as if debating whether to turn away and listen to a hymn, or the sobs of a man who had known the feel of mercy in an hour of cold, quiet, merciless death. Ezekiel felt a drop of sweat roll down his temple, followed by a second, cooling the heat of the sun on his skin. He did not move. He allowed them to think him a corpse. He allowed the world to pretend he wasn't there, so the world might unmake its plan to destroy him. His senses sharpened with the long hours. He could hear the wind threading its fingers through the grasses, and the grasses whispering secrets of the ground. He could feel the roughness of the dirt against his cheek, the dampness of the soil, the subtle tremor of life in his chest that wouldn't quiet, a stubborn drum in the bones. He could tell when a bird landed on a twig behind him by the slight tremor of air, the small breath of life in a place where life was supposed to be extinguished. Then, just as the world seemed to be slipping away, a sound cut through the night of stillness, soft as a thread being pulled from fabric, a rustling in the bushes, a whisper of feet coming closer, the clash of a metal bit on leather. The guards moved as one mind, a chain that could snap at any moment, eyes suddenly bright with the electric fear of discovery. A woman's voice spoke, low as a prayer. "We have to move, Captain." The shots were heard miles away. "We'll tie him and leave. Then the Union will come and take the blame for what we do." The voice was clear, not gentle. It carried the weight of a soldier's oath and the fear of a civilian's life. But it was not the voice of a civilian. It was the voice of a nurse's daughter, perhaps, or a black woman who had known the lines of the guard's hand, the taste of the powder off a soldier's breath. She spoke again, a whisper that seemed to hold the entire war's breath in its throat. "We go now. He's still alive. We have to get him out." The guard who had earlier commanded the line spoke with a brittle bravado. "This one? After all that, you'd still risk it?" His breath came in rapid puffs, the kind that shows fear wearing a uniform. "An oath," she said. "An oath to the living or to death." Her words carried a quiet authority, one that might have belonged to a preacher. Before a sermon had the pews been made of pines, and the sermon of gunpowder and cloth. The guard hesitated. A moment later, he lowered his weapon, not toward Ezekiel, but toward the darkness pinning the ground. "We'll move him in the cover of night then," he muttered, almost as if the night could listen and grant mercy. But the night did not grant mercy. Mercy came in the form of rescue, someone who knew the land, who knew how to move through a field without waking the dead. This is where the rising action in truth gives way to the act of salvation. The rescue did not come in a blaze of trumpet calls or the sudden roar of a cavalry charge. It came as a careful, quiet thing. Two men crawled through the grass with the patience of hunters, their faces smeared with dirt and their hands empty of weapons, save for a length of rope and a tin cup with a small amount of stale water. They were Union soldiers, brothers in arms, though the color of their skins might have told a different story to the eyes of those who believed that war could only be fought by one kind of man. The taller of the two spoke in a whisper. That could have been the wind or the rustling of leaves. "He's still breathing." The other, a shorter man with a scar running along the edge of his jaw, replied, "Then we do not leave him." He pressed his hand to Ezekiel's chest, felt the steady rhythm there. "Hold still, friend. We've got you." Ezekiel's eyelids fluttered. He could not move much. The risk of detection would be higher with any movement. Yet he forced himself to breathe evenly, a trick learned in the trenches where any sudden motion could betray a plan. The men arranged him with care, lifting him with the tenderness of men carrying a child or a wounded animal, and placed him across their shoulders, one on each side as if to carry a cross. The ground whispered under their feet as they drifted from their captured field, creeping under the cover of brush, the river's edge offering a gleam of merciful light in the distance. The mare of the night bore him through the darkness. The river hummed with the old songs of home as they moved along its banks, the noise of their boots broken by the murmuring of the water. They crossed a shallow ford under the cover of a fallen log. The water's coolness smeared across Ezekiel's face like a baptism and cooled the fever in his blood. They moved with the quiet that only soldiers know, The way you become invisible when you are not seen. The way a river can swallow footsteps and never spill a single secret. When dawn broke, the world was pale and the trees wore dew like a cloak. The two men, who might as well have been shadows with kindness, carried Ezekiel into a small skirmish camp that belonged to the Union's hidden lines, where convalescents and deserters shuffled around in shawls and blankets. A surgeon, old and lean with a sun-weathered face, looked at him with eyes that had seen too much, eyes that held the memory of a war that never finished. The surgeon touched Ezekiel's side, listened with a patient steadiness. 12 bullets passed near vital organs, he said, almost to himself, but loud enough for the men to hear. A stubborn heart, a stubborn will, and the land has kept you for a reason. Ezekiel's voice startled him. It wasn't loud, more a rasp of a throat that hadn't spoken in hours. I owe my life to strangers who refuse to forget we exist. The surgeon's lips settled into a line. You're a long way from home, Thornwood. The name felt odd on a Confederate tongue, but it was a word he would own and bear with dialectic courage. You saved me, Ezekiel said to the two rescuers, who stood at the edge of the tent with their heads hung, as if they were parents who had believed a miracle would happen, but didn't dare believe it until it did. You risked your own lives to bring me to air and light. The scarred one smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. We're not heroes, he said softly. We're soldiers. We do what must be done. The other man, lighter-skinned, eyes the color of storm clouds, nodded. And you, soldier, you must tell the story so that the world remembers. There are more like you who are not so lucky. Climax weeks after the night of rescue. The battlefield behind the medical tents grew more ruthless. New rumors, old prejudices, and a war that refused to forgive. Ezekiel walked the perimeter at dawn with a limp that would in any other man have spelled the end of his campaigns. In those mornings, the dew tasted of iron and salt and the promise of a long, hard road ahead. The heart of the conflict, the original wound he had survived, began to shape into something else. A quiet, stubborn resolve to prove that a black soldier could endure as long as any other. There were days when the memory of that firing squad haunted him like a ghost of a funeral bell. Yet there was a new memory forming too. The memory of the 8 hours when all the world believed him to be dead. And he proved them wrong. One afternoon, as the fields around the camp filled with smoke and the smell of cooking meat, Ezekiel met a fellow infantryman named Silas, a man with a stubborn jaw and a voice that could cut through the fiercest wind. They spoke as soldiers do, with the casual, brutal honesty that comes from shared danger. You lived, Silas said, almost a prayer, as if uttering the word aloud could grant him endurance. Tell me what you felt those 8 hours. Ezekiel raised his head, eyes steady on Silas. You asked me to tell you what I felt. I felt nothing but time. Time stretched like a bad rope and wound around the heart. I listened to the world decide whether to keep me or to let me go. Silas nodded, as if expecting that answer. What did you hear? Footsteps? Ezekiel replied, and for a moment his voice found its old rhythm, the cadence of a soldier marching at dawn. The world breathing. A guard's curse. A nurse's whisper to a child who will not die. He paused, then added with a sly, almost proud smile, I heard the river talk to the wind like old friends at a harbor. The men around them laughed softly, the sound rough-edged, but full of relief. The rebellion of sound, the laughter that filled a wartime camp, became their new medicine. A critical moment came when a tainted rumor spread through the lines, that a black man could not survive a machine that had once been the instrument of death. It traveled like a fever. It settled into the bones of men who looked at Ezekiel with a mix of admiration and fear, as if he bore a mark that others did not want to acknowledge. In that moment, Ezekiel found himself in a conversation with a commanding officer of the Union Army, a stern man named Captain Hart, who carried the weight of 2 continents in his eyes, a man who believed in the cause, who believed in the humanity of black soldiers, despite the world's insistence that their lives were cheap. Thornwood, Hart said, pronouncing the name with a careful respect, as though it were a fragile artifact. Your story will matter. It will show the world that the Union fight is not a line drawn in blood, but a line drawn in conscience. Will you tell your story to a wider audience? Sir, Ezekiel answered, my story is not a spectacle. It is a duty. If there are others in the fields who think they do not belong, or who believe their lives are not worth the fight, let them hear what happened to me, and perhaps they'll realize they too belong. Hart nodded. the lines around his eyes softening for the first time in months. Then you will tell it. You will become a voice for those who cannot speak. Ezekiel's days turned to a cadence of drills and conversations. He learned the names of the men who had saved him, 2 who had risked their own lives in the shadow of a field that could so easily swallow a man whole, leaving behind nothing but a rumor of a tale. Resolution, the core moment, the 8 hours in the Earth's embrace, the 12 bullets that found their way around every vital organ, remained the spine of his narrative. Yet the war moved forward as wars do, with new battles, new losses, and a world that began to question what it meant to be free. Eventually, Ezekiel Thornwood's voice, once silent in the hours of captivity, found its way into the camps and into the sidewalks and journals that would outlive the war. He spoke not of heroism as a loud banner or a drumbeat, but of something quieter, more essential, human survival against a system that had no business labeling him as less than. He didn't claim miracles. He claimed a choice to keep still when freedom seemed far out of reach, to act when the moment demanded it, to live, to fight, to breathe, to tell the truth when the world needed to hear it. The end of the war did not erase the scars. The firing squad's memory lingered as a caution, a reminder that a black man's life was a battlefield in itself. That courage wore many masks and many uniforms, and that history often judged the bravest by the color of the flag they bore, rather than by the readiness of their heart to endure. But Ezekiel Thornwood did endure. And through him, others learned that a life saved by the hands of strangers, 2 soldiers who risked the night, a surgeon who kept vigil over a pulse, a captain who believed in a future for all, could become a future worth fighting for. In the years that followed, he carried the memory as one carries a map earned in dark times, the map that shows paths not taken, the paths that must be taken now. He spoke little of the 8 hours beneath the ground, but when he did, it was not to glorify the act of survival, but to remind others that life, every life, holds a line to be drawn between those who would stay silent and those who would dare to speak. And when the field lay quiet again, and the bells of old battles had long since faded, Ezekiel Thornwood walked the edges of the camps with the quiet grace of a man who had seen death, who had refused to surrender to it, and who had learned to carry the memory of those 12 bullets not as a wound, but as a vow that every life would be counted and every voice heard in a world that would not forget what it took to win freedom. The final image of his days is not a dramatic flourish, but a soft, steadfast presence, eyes turned toward a horizon where the fields of the old war still breathe. The wind still carries the scent of gunpowder and rain, and a black soldier, named Ezekiel Thornwood, remains a living memory of resilience and justice, a living proof that survival in a firing squad's grasp is not merely a narrow miracle of luck, but a choice to endure in the face of a cruel, unkind world. And when the sun dips low, painting the sky in copper and gold, the soldiers gather and tell his name with respect. They speak it like a prayer and a pledge. Ezekiel Thornwood, the man who faced 12 bullets and lived to tell a story not of death, but of a life reclaimed through quiet courage, through fidelity to a cause bigger than himself, and through a rescue that saved more than one body that day. The war ends in memory, but his story does not fade. It travels from camp to camp, from letter to letter, from grandfather to grandson, always returning to the same moment, the moment when a black soldier stood where fear and faith meet and chose life. He carried that choice forward, a beacon in the night for every soldier who would come after him, a reminder that even in the darkest hours there are bodies and hearts still willing to risk everything for the sake of a single breath of freedom. And those breaths, once saved, became a chorus that the war could not still. Ezekiel Thornwood lived, and in his living, the memory of the 8 hours that stretched like a horizon behind him, the 12 bullets that never touched his heart, and the rescue that came as a quiet mercy, lived on, like the sea.